Hey, what do you
Cheers.
mean? First, let's cheer that up in our nice plastic cups. This is how you do it.
I
on this show.
freaking love it though, because this is totally my style. Like,
You didn't even know that we did a podcast. I had to tell you yesterday that we make a podcast, and I said you should be on it. And you're like, "What podcast?" And you're like,
yeah, that was totally yesterday.
"But I'm like, if you watched it, you'd see how fancy we are. We do
See,
some pretty
I
pop
watched
stuff."
Kayla's and Lindsay's,
Oh, did you really?
and I was like,
There's no
I
way you're
totally
gonna
want
be,
to do it with alcohol.
but there's probably no way you're gonna be better than them because they're pretty cool.
They are pretty badass.
Actually, you know what? I bet you could smoke them if you get enough of this prosecco in you before the end
Then
of
we
this
could
podcast.
not air it.
So, for those that are going to be listening for the first time, introduce yourself.
Okay.
Who are you?
Jen Reininger. Am I supposed to also give you like where I'm at,
I
what I
want the
did, like
horoscope. If I could get that, maybe.
my
Yeah.
social security number is? Like,
Yes, this is harmless, super harmless.
you know, senior development manager at Yondr. Spent a lot of time growing up in my, career over at Cyrus One, like literally like in college.
Weren't you a CBTS?
Yes. So like an
OG
original
as well?
OG. Yeah. So like started in college as a summer job and just continued on managing a conference center down there on 7th Street in Cincinnati. And
So pause, hold on. So real quick, you're born and raised in Ohio?
born and raised in Cincinnati.
Okay.
Parents are from there. No one moves.
And that's
they're
your
from
football
Cincinnati.
team too?
Yes. I love Joe Burrow.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, look, we have a few people on our team that they went to the really horrible public schools too,
Mhm.
and they are Bengals fans as well. And we have very special positions that are limited for
Mhm.
them.
Yeah.
You can only have so many Bengals fans on your staff.
This is true. Yes.
But I've learned that there is no one from Ohio that isn't diehard Ohio everything. Like
That is
from
true.
the
Like
Bengals, to the
Ohio
Buckeyes,
State.
the mustard, the chili, all of it, right?
Have you had it?
I've
The
had-
Skyline Chili, the three-way?
So I was on a submarine that was called the Memphis,
Okay.
and half the crew was from Tennessee. It seemed like the other half of the crew was from Ohio. So I not only learned how to appreciate and enjoy everything that comes from Ohio, but because they're so over the top as football fans, I've learned how to not appreciate every football team from Ohio. I literally wasn't a Penn State fan until I lived with an Ohio State fan. I was like, I have to pick. Am I going to be a Michigan fan for life or a Penn State fan for life? But
Can't be a Michigan fan.
so anyways, but you're from there. Are you the youngest, oldest?
I'm the youngest. I have a sister 4 years older than me. My dad actually was in the data center world.
Mm.
And so that's kind of like how I got my foot in the door
At Cincinnati
at
Bell.
Cincinnati Bell.
So I don't want to jump right to that. I
Yeah.
want to start at the beginning because were you a nerdy nerd? Were you a
I was
mathlete? Were
in
you
grade school, straight A's all the way through.
sure?
Huge anxiety about like always being an overachiever. And then I got to high school and I realized what fun was. And all those years, my parents said, "Don't worry about your grades. Like, you'll be fine. You'll be fine." May have taken that a little extreme, like nothing
You
below a
literally
C or
didn't
anything.
worry.
I literally stopped worrying in high school. But
Did your
that was like-
anxiety go away when you stopped trying to become an overachiever? Anxiety developed
anxiety
for
for school.
something.
Yeah, it switched to something else. I also grew up like competing horses, so I always kept my anxiety,
Oh
there.
wow, is that your thing? You're a horse girl.
I'm a horse girl.
I was
That's
at the
fair
rodeo.
warning to everyone.
I was at the rodeo in Fort Worth last week with Lindsay.
It's
Eh,
the best.
And she was watching. She's like, "Yeah, Jen could really, she's a horse girl." And I'm like, "I don't even know what that means. I didn't know they had those in Ohio." So.
Yeah. So it's actually a really big thing in Ohio. One of the largest equine facilities for competing's there. They have
Really?
one there, and then they have one down in Ocala. It's actually the R&R carriers. So they own that Robbie Roberts.
So what kind of riding do you do?
So I grew up doing 3-day eventing and dressage. My daughter just finished up doing some hunter jumpers, and now she is doing dressage.
Okay, so can I ask a stupid question?
No,
Is that Western saddle or is that
no English?
okay?
Yeah. So we have the fancy hats and
Yeah.
all the fun jazz.
Have you ever been just bucked off a horse?
Way too many times. Actually, when I was in high school, I actually had a horse do a rotational fall fox hunting, and actually broke a vertebrae in my back.
No kidding.
A little crazy.
And you still ride those things?
Still do. See, like that's why I said it's like a red flag with horse people because, like, that's just insanity, right?
So
Like,
were you born and raised on a ranch?
I was not. Grew up in a subdivision, but we kept our horses, at a local barn. And my mom rode. Once, like, we handed down the pony to her, and my sister rode. So my dad will never retire, technically.
Were you an athlete though? Did you
Yeah,
or did you
I did soccer.
not- okay.
But then I competed in the horses. Like for high school,
From what age did you start?
I started when I was 7 riding, and actually competed across the U.S.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Were you any good?
Yes.
Okay.
I
All
mean,
right.
it depends, right? Like, we did
Now, if
pretty
you
well.
were, if
Yeah.
you're a winner, you're a winner,
Yeah.
right?
We
So,
did really well. I mean, we were not like Olympic level or
yeah.
anything close to that. But we did well in the shows that we competed in.
What do you think you learned? What's the stuff that you learned the most in
Grit.
that? What is it?
Grit.
In what way?
And what
Unpackage that.
like not actually like the full dirt, but we get that too. But like you learn to like fail and fail and fail, and just keep coming back for more, right? And like someone told me one time, like, "Oh, well, how do you do with constructive criticism?" And I was like, "In work, I do great. I used to pay people to beat me the crap out of me, with what I was messing up in writing." So like, I appreciate that kind of feedback. And so I did want my kids. My son doesn't do it; but he does baseball. But I wanted my daughter to continue into that because it teaches you to be tough. Like, if you can control a 1,200-pound animal, coming into the office every day is a piece of cake.
Does it teach you patience too?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because that's probably, I mean, grit seems like you have to have some courage and, but I have to imagine understanding that you're not in charge of that animal sometimes has to really force you. That's probably another reason why I've definitely ridden horses a lot, but I've never really enjoyed it because of the lack of ultimate control you have over such a massive thing that could kill you.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
So what's your story? I mean, you still continue to ride to this day?
Yeah. So I don't get as much time as I would like to, but the horse that we have now is actually the daughter of the horse I had growing up. So
No
it's kind of like
way.
a cool story that like I had the mom as the mom, and then my daughter, has
No
the
way.
daughter. Yeah. So I was actually watching her ride the other day, and we just moved her to a new barn, which is actually the barn that I had my mare at growing up. And I was like, it looks just like,
That's pretty cool.
20 years in the past, right? Like,
That is the one thing about Ohio is how you guys, people there, they just keep their roots there,
yeah.
right? They really dig in deep. I could respect that. When you did soccer, you did horseback riding. From that point to how did you get to Cincinnati Bell? Your father was in the game?
Yeah, so actually I went to school to be an occupational therapist. I went to Xavier, and I was actually a nanny, and then I decided, maybe nannying is not the thing for me.
But hold on, were you nannying before you decided to be an occupational therapist?
Yes. So I was in college, so it was like
But I
summer
mean,
job.
occupational therapist is like a nanny for grown-ups instead of like a nanny for kids?
It's like a physical therapist, only focused more on teaching someone how to do activities that may be more challenging, so you find adaptive ways.
Do they live with them? I mean,
No,
okay.
no. Like the therapist, it's just like a PT, a physical therapist.
Okay.
Maybe the speech pathologist and OT and PT. So just as a nanny, I had actually worked at a like a daycare, and the group of parents were like, "Hey, can you actually nanny for us?" So I did that. It was great money. Like I got to have a summer. We went to the pool. We went to the country club. It was a great time, but kind of decided like it's time for me to move on. Do something else. And so my dad's like, got this conference room. I can introduce you to this guy, Dave Burns. See
What was your dad doing though? Was he at Cincinnati Bell?
He was at Cincinnati Bell, yeah. So
And
he did
was he
some data
legacy
center
there?
selling space there, but I don't think that was his main focus at the time. So he was like, talk to them. We've got a big data center, on 7th Street, and
Your dad was in sales though?
he was for a little bit, and then I think he like kind of moved in different divisions. He
Did
ultimately
you ever work with Wojo?
he did.
No
He
way.
did, yeah. So Jack Cassidy, Wojo, all of them. Yeah.
Wow.
So
That's kind of cool.
yeah.
So keep going. I keep interrupting
Yeah, no,
you.
you're good. So
I suck.
So I like did that, and when I was getting ready to graduate, obviously huge student loans coming, right? Like private college, they were adding up. So they offered me a position to stay on in process development. Did that for a little bit, and was like, it's not for me. Like,
What was that? What is that?
it
Process
was just
development.
creating new processes to make things easier at the job, which I love processes, but like, it wasn't my cup of tea or team. So they came to me and they're like, we got Ed Martin for you.
Oh yeah. The process.
Yeah, the process king.
Yes.
So I moved into ops, and I always refer to Ed as like the godfather, right? From the Bell days. And couldn't have had a better, boss. Apparently he's nicer to the women on his team than the men.
Of course.
So like I didn't get
I was
that
like, I've
anxiety.
never seen him not be abrasive. But he kept data centers running.
He did. He kept them running, and everyone learned a lot, and he was fair.
Yeah.
The one thing I always said about Ed, like, he will defend you to the nth degree in front of everyone. But if you need a beat down, like, you're gonna learn,
Yeah.
behind closed doors of like that's not what you should have done. But he was all about his teams and keeping them together and having their back.
I liked about him that he had a standard.
Yes.
And if you weren't Everybody. He didn't give a shit what you did, it seemed like. It didn't matter what your title was either. But he had a standard, and if you met that standard, the only affirmation you received was that he would be like, all right. But if he didn't like you, then you knew
Yeah.
more than that. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
You
Yeah,
know?
all right it was a huge pat on the back.
Yeah. So, but he made you earn it, right? So there's not enough of those types of people
Exactly.
in this game, and that's one of those things that you recognize when you see it. It's rare, and it's a hard job. Guys like that in those opera roles, they have one of the hardest jobs in the business, is keeping those lights on, and they know that requires pressure.
Yep.
And you can, when you're 24/7, 365, I imagine you can't turn it off, right? But I didn't know him nearly like you did, and I only sat in a few meetings with him. But I always understood exactly where I stood with him.
That's exactly it. And like I still use some of his taglines today. Like, you got to document everything, because if you get hit by the beer truck tomorrow, we need to know where things are at. So like that is one thing like I still even use, to this day. I think I actually even said it last week when I was in Amsterdam was, guys, we got to make sure we document everything. If you get hit by the beer bus,
Yeah.
gotta
No,
have
that's a
it.
lot to unpackage. So you went from intern at Cincinnati Bell, full-time employee working for Ed,
Yep.
and now you're coming back from Amsterdam, and you were just in like Norway, you said, or something like that. But
Yeah.
so let's back up, because I want to get to that, because we're going to get to Yondr and what you're doing
Yeah.
and all that. But I think it's great for me and others to understand you better too, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of us in this industry, you were at Cyrus, I wasn't there when you were there. But I mean, there's a good chance we'll keep crossing paths, right?
Absolutely.
And that's how this industry is so beautiful, and how everyone kind of just evolves in their own little pace and gets to float into different areas within the ecosystem of the industry. But I imagine you'll be someone that's going to be around for a bit, so you should help people understand, because there'll be times where in the role that you have, in the development role that you have, which is so critical for the bit, that's the first phase of all 5 phases
Call
of
it
the
the
data center.
foundation.
Right.
It's the foundation.
And that makes you very important, and it's important for people to understand how to engage with you, because you may have a problem, you may have a challenge that you're running into, through some element of the entitlement process or whatever you have, and what you don't know is that there's someone that is emerging with a product or a solution for you, and they don't know that you need a solution, and you have no idea they exist. And although you're prevalent and present at all these conferences, you're still not going to connect with everybody.
No, absolutely not.
So that's one of the genesises behind this. And I'm like, hey man, you should come on and talk and share your story.
Yeah.
That way people know you, and then they know what you're doing, and they figure out between that altitude and airspeed, how do we engage, right? And that's how we build these networks. That's all what it's about, right?
It's all about relationships.
100%. So going back, you were there and you were working with Ed, and
Working with that. Yep.
and then you probably saw front row the acquisition of Cincinnati Bell when they bought down Cyrus. So like start back in that area, and I'll shut up and listen.
Yeah. So back when I was in ops, I did a lot of the analysis of reporting. Favorite one was the metered power billing, PUE. Like, talk about anxiety. It definitely came back then, but yeah, it was definitely neat. So you had the CBTS team, but then you had the Cincinnati Bell team. And while one was the parent company, one was the sister company, that was not, as clear to everyone on the outside, right? So that came in, and it was actually the Burns brothers that had CBTS that actually were the data center group at that time. All the data centers sat under the CBTS org. But when they wanted to go buy Cyrus, I actually was unfortunately not in the front line of seeing when the acquisition happened.
Got it.
I was more in the backseat of ops, like, all right, let's see what happens. We'll hear the stories of everyone, flying out to, go see the Cyrus One sites, get the reports back, of what they looked like. But it was definitely a different time back then. We had, I said earlier, we had the CBTS versus the Cincinnati Bell, and it ended up that the data centers went with the Bell side, and then we purchased the Cyrus One. So it was really cool, and even Cyrus One didn't have a ton of what they have now, right? Like, it was just couple buildings, right? It was like Houston, I think a couple in, other areas of Texas, but it wasn't as prevalent. And then they went gangbusters. And I was fortunate enough that Kevin Timmons came to me. He's like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Right. And I was like, I don't know. Like, what are my options? Like, I didn't know what to say. Not very often where the CTOs come into the, like one of the junior people in ops. And I was like, I don't know, but I want to do something different. Like, ops is cool, but I want to do something different. And he's like, well, would you like to go into our site selection?
Ooh.
And I was like,
is that with Sylvia?
It was with Sylvia.
Okay.
Yes. So, and I'd actually worked with her on some PUE stuff and meter power billing. So I knew it was I was getting into with that. But it was a great opportunity. And I knew nothing about development, that stage. And I found that it was awesome because
Yeah, the volume.
like every site was different. Every project had, something you had to be creative to, solve for a solution on it. And I fell in love with it.
What were some of those problems? Like, I mean, paint with a broad stroke.
Yeah,
You don't have to get, but is it the power? Is it the neighbors? Is it the noise complaints? The air permits? What is a big
yeah. Well, all of those now, right? All of those are now like exponentially larger
right?
than they were, before. Like I was talking to someone earlier and I was like, like power, people would be like, it's going to take you 12 months to get power. And you're like, oh, like that's so long. Now, now places you're here in 5, 8 years before you can get power. So the challenges have definitely increased. But, like originally it was trying to find land that, you thought your clients wanted, and a lot of times, sometimes the clients weren't 100% sure what they wanted or what their standards were, or they were going through changes. So I think that was probably the hardest thing then. Everyone was still kind of trying to learn. Now it's, does the site have power? How can you befriend your neighbors before it's posted all over Facebook that they don't like data centers, which I'm like, well, quit posting on Facebook if you don't want data centers,
Right.
like all the social media, all your banking. But, it's making those friendships. And I think by being good partners as data centers, as we should be, we should be getting ahead of those, items there. But I would say that, right now power is the issue, but it wasn't as much of an issue.
What
at
was
least
it back in the day?
Probably just
Municipalities being
they
civil.
were so they were great. Like they all wanted data centers to come because they brought in the big tax thing. I would probably say was kind of figuring out what the exact client's requirements were because they weren't always extremely open. If you're buying land speculatively,
So
we weren't
explain
getting
that, because there's people, like, the beauty about this industry is that there's going to be people that play in all the different quadrants within the industry,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes they know, hey, there's, I'm a part of, the first stage of a data center life cycle is the development requirement phase, right? And that's where you're at.
Yeah.
So that phase that people don't understand, let's put a pin in that because you're going to break that down for us. Phase 2 is after people like you are done working with the, the operators and the enterprise end users and finding out the right piece of property and the right things that they need to go with that. Then they say, hey, this is the requirements for what we have to deliver for this product. And then you have an A&E team that go into the design, right? So that's the second phase. Part 3 is the building of it. 4 is the commission. 5th is the operations. In that first stage, because a lot of people in this industry, 90% of this industry falls after stage 1. 98% of this industry falls after phase 1. So it's a very small niche of subject matter experts that could go high, wide, and deep on how to get power and space and connectivity in large aggregate volumes in this state, this country, this nation, right? Yeah. So break that down, because I don't think a lot of people understand what those dominoes look like, because they're a byproduct of that. They show up and go, all I know is that someone's coming here and they need this many engines. Someone upstream, the very first chapter, which is where you sit, is initiating that first domino that falls.
Yes, absolutely.
Unless there's something, I paint with broad strokes. So is there something better that I miss? I don't want to trivialize it.
I think you hit it like right on the, the nail right on the head on that one. Like trying to find a property that Laramie's going to kill me for this, but he always wants me to find properties that have right angles, like square property. So
don't make it easy for him.
Perfect.
Do not make it easy for him.
I absolutely don't.
He needs to work for a living too.
Yeah. It's he calls them my baby dinosaur sites. And, because they're not square, like especially in Northern Virginia, right? Like you're going to have sites that are all weird shapes. They have wetlands, and I get hammered on that one all the time. I'm like, listen, I'm getting you sites that have power and work for connectivity. Like we're going to have to figure out the rest of it, right? Like in zoning, right? And, zoning's a big issue. I don't want to go through and rezone things.
No,
right?
you have to tell them. You say that's a construction problem. That's not a first phase problem. That's a stage 3 problem.
I like it. I'm going to be like, so Kirk said, Laramie.
No, we'll edit that out. That doesn't have to. No, I'm kidding. But like, that's a lot of brain damage.
It is.
And people don't realize how long it takes. The CEWA process in Northern California versus building in Texas could not be more different, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So how do you stay up to date on those things and walk people through what the lion's share of that brain damage looks like? Because you're playing both ends against the middle, the city plus the enterprise end users requirements, right? Yeah. So how is that horse trading? Right. So how does that walk us through? Is that a 3, 6, 9, 12-month iteration?
It
And what are
depends on
some
the
of the big
market, right?
challenges?
Like, so Northern Virginia, I think we have all of those standards down. Now, unfortunately, they are changing them, once again on us. But luckily, they've actually had us be a part of it. So I sit on the board of the Data Center Coalition, and we've been heavily involved in the zoning ordinance updates. And while we may not like them, we're at least aware of them. But it is taking months and months. And we've started this, last year, reviewing that with them. So I think having the right partners and like, I think I said that earlier, like being a good partner. We have, great partners in the industry. And because it is such a small industry, half of them are our friends, half of them we probably worked with, in the past lives. And then the other half we'll work with them another time, right? In another phase of our careers. And having those guys. So having the right partners for due diligence are super helpful. Having the relationship with the local authorities, like Buddy Reiser in Virginia, you can text him anytime and say, hey, like, what are you doing here?
People
Like,
that don't know Buddy he's Caesar in Virginia on getting
absolutely
things through Loudoun County, right?
phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so having those relationships, really help, but really just trying to, actually, I will give Sylvia credit for this one. She said site selection is like dating, and you've got to just see what you got to live with. And I said, well, Sylvia, I haven't been great at dating, so maybe we shouldn't use that as an analogy. But she said, yeah, no, like they're all going to have issues. You're going to fall in love with it at first. And then you like go through due diligence, you go through all of the processes with the, local authorities and your teams. You're going to start seeing, the hair on the dog here and say like, what can we live with? And that's really what it ends up being. Like, what can I live with on each of the sites to move forward? Because they're not going to be perfect. So starting from, day one, you'll do a market analysis and then you'll start picking the sites, find 10 sites and then you'll down select them.
Where do you get your information from? You have to work collaboration with like the brokers.
The brokers are a good resource for that. The local, like Buddy, economic development teams, they're, a great resource of knowledge. A lot of times your vendors, like your civil engineers, they've got a ton of info, if they're in that area. And typically they have a team at least, in the different areas.
And they're kind of open netting, when they see something that meets a certain criterion that they know they could put in their pocket and be like, hey, I'll call someone and that could trigger.
Yeah, exactly. When we did, at Cyrus, we did a lot of like through the economic development. We did some brokerage, but I really found that the economic development teams were extremely helpful.
They're more incentivized to get rid of that and do something for the land. I mean, for the town.
Yeah, they're not looking at it as a personal gain and like, no bash against, brokers or anything, but they have a motive there, right? Like they want to sell it or they want to buy it to get, to get commission. And so, not that that's a bad thing. That's definitely a resource that's, used, but it's also good to have that conversation with someone that's not incentivized financially.
Well, they're more objective. Yeah. So they're ambivalent to what you pick.
Exactly.
As long as it's something that's theirs, right? So that makes sense. So I asked you a question. I was like, what are some of the bigger challenges other than, the ones that were pretty obvious? Mm-hmm. Was there anything else that has prevailed post-COVID? Anything else besides, I'm guessing that utility providers are having a hard time. Is it the utility providers that are lagging hardest? So,
yes, I think that is the longest, tent in the pole the tent.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think, will change that?
I keep pushing. We got to figure out a way to do on-site generation of some sort. And I am not a brain behind that, but I feel like that is right now is the only thing that we as an industry could make a difference in. And there's a lot of risk with that, right? Depending on what you're looking at for on-site, generation. But right now, like the actual generation of power from the utility companies is starting to come into question, and that's a problem.
Jim Roche will be talking at DCAC Live this year about SMRs, right?
Yes, yeah.
And I'm not sure if I know you know him too. He gave his overview of that at their Cyrus One Vendor Summit, and it was fantastic. And it fell, have you heard of Nuclear Now?
Yeah.
Okay, have you watched it?
No, I haven't watched it.
Fantastic. Oliver Stone, it really did a good job of bifurcating the difference between nuclear weapons and nuclear power, and those that reject all nuclear don't realize that what they're really doing is creating a global, if they believe in a global climate crisis, the genesis behind that is us and the solution is actually nuclear, right? And coming from a submarine background like me, I know that we can ride those machines out really well. And we have been able to prove that there's not a bunch of nuclear reactors just sitting on submarines laying on the bottom of the ocean somewhere. there's human nature at play, but I think the Navy's demonstrated that you can operate those reactors without losing them, and it's safer and better for the environment.
I was just gonna say, like, think of all of the, infrastructure that we have to pull in for, the utility companies and all of the coal that they're doing, to, create power at the generation.
Yeah.
I think it's just nuclear is a scary word, to the people. And we already have, the communities that are afraid of data centers because they don't know what's in them. Slightly nervous if we tell them, like, hey, we're going to put a data center here and the nuclear, but I'm a push for it. Like, I would really like to move forward with that.
With what you're doing, are you constantly just like going out and collecting intel on emerging markets too?
Yeah.
And so you're constantly just roving around and collecting intel on markets that you can go into?
Absolutely. And, doing power studies and, different markets. Because really that's, like I said earlier, like that's our biggest lead, hang time. So if you can figure out, the power, pray to God that there's network nearby,
So how do you get connected with like the Sun Group or, groups like that are trying to figure out how to harvest certain ESG-based solutions and they have capabilities as well as limitations, right? So there's people that are trying to solve for that, and that's on the other side of the ball, the power ball. Have you figured out a way to create a collective in which the demands are able to meet the people that are trying to create solutions but can't make a business case to justify investing the capital yet because there's not enough demand they can connect with? But we know the power demand is in every major NFL city because that's where we use the hub and spoke backbone to create the data center networks that we have, right?
Yep.
So there's power needs everywhere.
Absolutely.
And with that economic development groups in the teams and the things that you're doing to go out and figure out how to aggregate information on where the power sits on grids.
Yeah. There are groups that are out there, doing that. We've got a great power team that, is making those contacts, having those conversations. Because like you said, there are groups. Actually, our parent company has, another company underneath it, that is a renewable energy company.
Oh, gotcha.
So we're fortunate we have those kind of conversations.
So you have all kinds of juice. I forgot. Because there's you guys, I forgot about the connections within, we haven't got to Yondr yet. So that's where you cut your teeth on this development stuff.
Yep.
And you realized you like it.
I love it.
And that's what you just started picking into?
Just picked into it. And then I had great partners. And like I said, I knew nothing, right? So like, I remember being on a call and someone said LOI. It was like my first call in development. I was like, what is LOI? Like,
it's a typo.
Like, Googling. Yeah. I was like Googling like LOI, letter of intent. And I was like, oh, okay. I have a lot to learn. But, great vendors like, Corgan at the time, I was working with Jason Hanna.
Oh, sure.
And, he would do lunch and learns with me, kind of teach me like, oh, this is what you're going to need to look at. Like, this is why you look at that. Yeah. So like, I'd grab each of my vendors and be like, if you help me now, it will save you time and money and I won't screw it up. Like, I mean, I'll probably screw it up at some point, but like, I'll at least have that head start.
How did you know to do that? How did you know to harvest your partner ecosystem to educate yourself? Because I did the same thing.
Yeah.
I always did. That's the best part of being on your side is you could line up all. If you're, hey, I want to know a generator, UPS.
Yeah.
Hey, bring in like the top 5 UPS guys and then all pitch to you. It could take one day, an hour a piece.
That's perfect.
And you just got educated on everything's going on in the market and UPSs in one day, right? That's the beauty about the power you have in the positions that you're in. So how did you know to leverage that ecosystem for your education?
So we had an attorney over at Troutman, and she was a badass. Like she's kind of like my superhero, like role model.
What was her name?
Maureen Callahan.
I think I know that name. I don't know why.
she was fantastic, and I would frustrate her, and she was like, "Get on a call. We're gonna." So she was the initial, lunch and learn. So we would do. She's like, "I'm gonna teach you how to redline shit," and I was like, "Okay." So she would go through, and I'd be like, "Okay, well, why that?" And she's like, "You need to do this with all of your other vendors." And I was like, "No, I really appreciate that because I wanted to know, I wanted to learn, I wanted to be good, at what I did because I'm pretty competitive." And so I was like, I'm gonna do this. So it was just took her kind of kicking my butt one day and saying like, you know what, I want to learn this with all of my teams, right? I want to make sure that
that's
it's a
really
partnership.
smart.
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
It would have been
Cyrus One Days or before that?
No, this was Cyrus One Days. So this was in development. I want to say it was 2015 actually.
Smart.
Yeah.
Is that how you still rock and roll today?
I do.
You just bring them all in, get educated? Smart.
Absolutely. I actually started the lunch and learn programs, at Yondr as well, because I knew that there were other people like having questions. So the last one we did was on wetlands, so.
No kidding.
Yeah. So if you have any topics, we're always looking for topics to bring lunch and learns.
So in this time, as you're making these transitions, You worked, I mean, it sounds like Timmons is who recruited you. Who did you work for at Cyrus at the time? And who did you work with?
Sylvia.
Okay.
She was my direct boss.
And was Lindsay there?
She came about 6 months to a year after I started over there,
I got you.
and she was a godsend.
Okay.
Absolute godsend.
So you guys worked together. I've obviously had Lindsay on, and
Yep.
I was just with her last week, as I was saying. I didn't realize how she follows stats on rodeo, like
She has a
Jesse
bull.
Sargent on my team on the Cincinnati Bengals, right? He'll
Yeah.
tell you who farted last
Yeah.
week and everything. She's not quite that big on the Bulls yet, but she's a huge PBR fan, which is awesome because she's like, "Oh yeah, this guy's from Brazil and he loves chapstick." You know, I was like, "What are you talking about?"
She
she's
knows
fu-
it.
Yeah.
So she bought the tickets for me because I think they went on sale today. So she bought them for me last week for the rodeo in January. I guess when it's like their reopening one.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go to that one with her because I've never been to like a big time rodeo.
Well, that was Cowtown, so that's like an institution. You gotta
Yeah.
go do that one too. But so you guys
So
worked
yeah.
together. That's how you guys connected. And then
Fantastic boss, by the way.
oh,
She was fantastic. She would take the time, as well to kind of coach you through things. And she was always so inspiring with that. She could get on calls and person could be just completely belligerent, on a call. And she could say super calm. I was like, I'm going to learn this skill. And there's one time she put someone in timeout on a call. The guy was just going off. And she's like, excuse me, I'm going to put you on hold for 1 second. She put him on hold. I was like, what are we doing? And she was like, he's in timeout. And I was like,
that's a Lindsay move for sure.
totally. Like, she didn't get mad. She just put him in timeout, came back on. The guy apologized. Like, I'm really sorry. It's some time to cool down there. She's like, yeah. All right, let's continue the conversation. And like,
that's her.
didn't miss a beat.
Yeah. She's crazy smart like that.
Yeah.
I can see that.
So that was a skill I learned from her.
So you guys got to work together, and then were you at Cyrus One from Cyrus One to Yondr, or did you?
No, so we had a non-compete at Cyrus.
That's right.
So I had to take some time off, and I actually went and worked for ESD, which is a wonderful
design
experience.
shop.
Yeah, and
Chicago?
they were fantastic. Yeah, in Chicago. I mean, I stayed at home; it was remote, but they were fantastic, and they let me kind of start up their site selection, due diligence,
Nice.
service offering. So I had a great time doing that, and then I got this phone call from Yondr, and I was like, I thought I knew all the players in the game,
Yeah.
right? And I was like, I don't know who this Yondr team is. Like, Googled it. I'm like, cell phone cases. Like,
I don't know if any of us knew it until like one day Laramie was like, "Hey man," and I was like, "What are you talking about? The cell phone case group?" I go see Rogan. I have to lock my phone up all the time. So I didn't know what it was either. And he's like, "Check over the pond. Like, look on the other side." And I was like, "Oh." And everybody knows who they are over there.
yeah,
right? So-
yeah, exactly. And so actually, Laramie was one of the people. There were 2 people I called, and Laramie was one of them. And he was like, "Sis, we're close like that." So now I'm his sister. He was like, "Sis, that's a company I'd work for." And I was like, "Oh." I thought that was like a wink, wink, nod, nod, like go on over. Because I've always relied on Laramie for those kind of like career choices because
Sure.
he's done such a great job, right? So I asked him, and he's like, "Yeah, I think that's a good move." And I was like, "Okay," like. So he kept asking, like, "Did you go? Did you go?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I was like, "Well, when are you coming?" He's like, "I don't know. What? Like, what?" I was like, "Oh, crap." So, like, was like really
So
excited
you
when
got
he
there
did.
before him.
I did on his
Nice.
guidance. So, like, he was a big fan of it. He loved Anna Murphy, who is a wonderful guy.
I've
And
heard nothing but good things. I've not met him, but I've only heard the best.
wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I work for that guy any day of the week.
It's funny how I one day want to be at that level where everyone will have that reaction to me because I don't have that at all right now.
Yes, you do.
No way. I mean, like, it's more like a straws thing, and then they have to figure out who has the short one. But like, that's something because a lot of people that I know and like and respect have a lot of respect for this person. I have to meet him at some
You have
point.
to.
Yeah, So-
Absolutely. Tell you a quick story about him. So he's a young guy, but he's just a fantastic leader. And like to me, that
Irish?
makes a big difference. Irish, yes.
Yeah.
Well, American now. He got his citizenship. So really excited for him. But it was when I first started, and he pulled me aside. I think it was literally the first time I met him. He pulled me aside and he goes, "Jen, on your calendar, you don't have any time on there that says like it's for your kids." And I was like, "Well, it's not for that, right?" Like I was like, "But I do like where it says focus time, like that's where I'm doing school drop off or whatever." And he goes, "Why don't you put it in there?" And I was like, "I don't want anyone to think I don't take my career seriously." He's like, "I need that to be a change that you make in the company. Like you need to feel comfortable so other young women that are coming up behind
Interesting.
you will feel comfortable." He's like, people have families. Like everyone's got a mom and a dad, right? Like, or had a mom and dad, or they have kids, or they have family of some sort, right? And he's like, I want people to feel like that's okay to have a life outside of work and they exist. And like, it really stuck with me. Like everyone says family first, right? But to actually say, I looked at your calendar and you don't have family first. Like, let's make that change. I was like, so now
Yeah, that's
it's
different.
on there. Like,
Good.
so I was
That's
really
pretty cool.
impressed. So
Well, that would
leadership,
explain
right?
why people are so. That's how you command loyalty is by putting others first like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why my daughter, she was ready to sign up and work for Yondr, which we'll see.
You have a daughter that's going to come work there too?
That's exactly what she wants. So a couple years ago, I did an article about how she now wants to be in the data center industry.
Now,
Solely
how old is
based
she?
off. She's 10 now.
Okay, perfect. And she wants to be in the space.
She wants to be in the space. She wants to be a
Awesome.
contract negotiator. She loves to argue with others.
Okay.
Thank God she doesn't want to argue with me
Ducks
yet.
have ducks. Yeah. I get
Yep.
it.
So she's like all on board, and it was actually because of Aina himself that she felt he was a big welcoming part, and if I was on a call with him, and she'd walk by, he would give her a shout out and stuff like that. So
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
How many people do you think get to say that they feel like they
Mhm.
have that level of support from their leadership?
Yeah.
To have that balance, because normally it's not. It's more like, hey man, I don't care about your problems with
Yeah.
I need this, and I've worked in every culture you can imagine, from hey man, I'll die for you to hey man, sorry, but if you could lay down so I could step on you, get 1 inch taller, that would be so much better, right? And it's funny how much we're willing to suffer, but once you have tasted that, like it's pretty hard to go back, don't you think?
I don't think I could. In all honesty, that would be really. I think it would make it even harder, right? Like once you taste something that's so good, like, and then everything tastes bad, like that would be a really, really hard one to adjust to.